All right. Well, welcome to the January 2021 Midday Cafe. We are thrilled that you're here. We love this fresh start and we're grateful for this community. So thank you, and know that your presence with us today is just a gift. Um, we always want to let you know that there are ways beyond this time just to connect in the Enneagram community, because this is a journey, friends. We know that. And so we've got some great opportunities in the Great Lakes region. And we'll just preface and say we have discerned as a Great Lakes board, really, it's kind of anywhere that touches a lake. You're welcome. So you don't have to be in the Midwest. And we have board members from other states as well. And so I want to let you know, one of our board members and a beautiful Enneagram teacher, Lori Tate, is doing a workshop coming up. It's online, so you can join starting February 24th, and it's a 5-week course just called Embracing Your Harmony Triad. So if you have even touched the spiritual rhythms for the Enneagram, the work that Clare is doing out in the world, Lori's work will complement that beautifully, and that online course, we'll post a link for that here in the chat in just a moment. And then we also have some accredited certification. So Claire actually just finished the January certification and training. And Claire, you can say, how many did you have in that training? I know that.
I think it was 48.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a great group. And I think somebody here from Canada, Ramona, she was with us.
Yeah. And so that was an online training. They have another training coming up in June of 2021. And it is great soul work that will equip you then to say, and now what? How can I go out and use this into the world and really integrate all 3 centers of intelligence? So brilliant work. We'll drop a link in that the chat for that as well. And then piggybacking on that, I also work with Teresa McCloy at the Real Life Process, and she offers a certification for facilitators. So for people wanting to use the tool of the Enneagram and the work they do. And the brilliant part is we've partnered with Clare, and actually it's a dual certification. So you get not only the Real Life Process, ongoing coaching content, community, and the certification, plus you get the Motions of the Soul training that and certification that Clare does as well. And then our great teacher, Dr. Jerome Wagner, has some awesome things coming up, winter, spring, and summer 2021. So I'll drop Jerry's link in as well so you can see what's happening at the Enneagram spectrum. But just want to preface and say we are recording this today, so just know that anything you share, we're going to be sharing it to our YouTube channel so that we can get the great work that's going to be shared out into the world a little further. So without further ado, just want to introduce our president and Clare Loughrige, and she's going to introduce today's guest.
Yeah, and Erica, am I mistaken, or doesn't Dr. Wagner have another training coming up here as well? Another certification? Yeah, so can you tell us about Dr. Wagner's training?
Yeah, well, I have the link. I'm going to drop it in there, and it'll have his dates and everything so that you can check out what's available. Because if summer, doesn't work for you, he also has some things a little later in the year. So
wonderful. And Danielle Fanfare just finished his class. What was your favorite joke from Dr. Wagner during the week-long training, Danielle?
So we're still actually moving through the modules, but he told another one yesterday. I've been texting Claire all the jokes, so she's been getting, her phone has been pinging from me. But he said he was looking for his PowerPoint, and he finally found it. And he goes, I found my PowerPoint slides. Now I'm just looking for my true self.
So I warned Danielle that, really, he may need a show produced because, of course, he has most of us. Doesn't matter how many times we hear his jokes, he has our hearts and our laughter. And I love that joke about the true self because with Dr. Drew Moser, I have to tell you, his book, Enneagram of Discernment, is available to you right now at a 20% discount. But I have to tell you, it's worth full price. When I read the introduction and Dr. Moser said this beautiful line about who am I? And he tells us in this introduction, about people who would say, this is not who I am. This is not who I am. And have you ever said that, where you had moments in your life where you responded in a way that came from your reptilian brain, where there was just a reaction that you say, that is not who I am. And I loved his words. He really says that, the Enneagram is not actually about who you are, but it's about who you're not. So I love that you'll unpack that and you'll actually quote yourself properly there. Because I really do see a person that in Dr. Drew Moser as a person who is willing to take a look at the collective of who we are in a way that is kind and is merciful and is scholarly. So he is a college professor at Taylor University. He's an author. He's the father of 5. So, he's got his own Enneagram Petri dish going on at home. And the thing I love is one of your other titles, that you're Dean of Student Engagement. And when I think about someone who's helping students engage and also helping them know who they are not, at a Christian university, I want you to know how intrigued I am at how you might carry out that good work.
Yeah.
And so we'll ask you a few questions about that, but can you say a quick hello before we go into our opening practice?
Yeah, I'd love to. Hi, everyone. It's great to be with you. And I'm just so thankful and honored to play a small part in the collective work that you all do. And those of you that I know, I respect your work immensely. And those of you who I don't know, I look forward to, getting to know you and connecting with you in this way and hopefully in the future. So thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited because I think that there are some discernment questions that can help us in a time where we might automatically respond, either out of our dominant style that is gut, our dominant style that is heart and affective emotions, or our dominant style, which is trying to compute where in the world are we now?
Yeah.
Almost a year into COVID, and certainly a year that has taken our breath away on more than one occasion. And oh, how we need to be people who practice discernment. So welcome. And may 2021 be a year that we do good better.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
So everyone, why don't we just take a moment and we'll just allow ourselves to be open and available to this moment that you've invested about 50 minutes of your life, and we know that your life matters. So you've chosen to be here and now. And so let's just for a moment take a breath and notice how much of us is here or how much of us is in the last encounter we just had. And notice that without judgment, and see if you can't bring yourself more into this conversation around the Enneagram and discernment. And I'll invite you to just get comfortable in your body in a way that gives you a way to hear what in my Christian tradition would be to hear what the Spirit is saying. And taking a breath. And knowing that you are a habitation. That within you, you are a spiritual being on a human journey. And so there's a way to listen. A way to be present. A way to be open and available. A way to hear something new. And so however you'd like to do that, if you'd like to hold your hands open, if you'd like to place your hands on your heart, or lift your hands and your face up. And just be as honest as you can in this moment and say something true. About your desire for this day. And then when you feel like you're able to come back to this group of people, some you know, some you don't know on the screen, and be present to the people in this room. In whatever way you want to practice hospitality to Dr. Drew Moser, you can smile at him, you can give him a wave. I don't know what the Texas welcome is or the Netherlands welcome is, but however you'd like to welcome and say, we're here and we want to hear words of life and hope. So welcome, friend.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Good to be with you.
So in this wonderful book called The Enneagram of Discernment, you talk about 9 questions that take us into discernment. And of course, 9 is just a great number when you're talking about the Enneagram.
Yeah, see what I did there? Yeah.
Yeah, see what you did there?
Yeah.
And I wonder, when you just maybe as we launch into this conversation, when you're working with students and you're working with 9 styles and 9 lenses on the world, how are you doing at a Christian university with this ancient tool that has really taken on some modern wonder and strangeness?
Yeah, no, that's a good way to put it. It's interesting. So, I do work at a Christian college, which basically means that whatever your kind of one idea of what that means is, it's certainly present here, but that's not the whole story. So we have, and this is true of the Enneagram. So we have, students who come here who are well-versed in the Enneagram when they set foot on our campus. Typically through their churches that they may have attended and grown up in. We have students that have never heard about it. We have students who think that it's awful and will destroy your faith. So, and just corrupt it to no end. And so I have the whole gamut there. And so I really do have to adjust how I talk about the Enneagram and how I engage students with it, depending on what perspective they're bringing. In the midst of, as we know, those of us that went to college or maybe have children who are in college, it's such a crucible of discovering who you are anyway. And so many seemingly important and landmark decisions, or at least trajectories, are made, which just makes it all the more fun and interesting to me. And I think what better way to help students kind of navigate this important time in their life than helping them discover who they truly are and who they're not. Yeah.
And who they're not.
Yeah.
So that is the big, hairy, audacious idea in this introduction here. And so can you talk a little bit about the quotes that you used in saying, I am not? I'm not, not who I am. This is not who I am.
Right. So I start the book with probably some well-known, at least to many of you, like celebrity apologies, which I think have kind of a constant theme that's often given from, I'm guessing, really high-end PR firms who, when a celebrity or public figure has a fall from grace, and they have to give kind of their apology. Very often you can just go through and look at them time and time again. It will include this phrase, "This is not who I am," almost as a way to kind of distance themselves from the act or the event, right? That was so damaging, to their career reputation. And so I kind of play with that a little bit, because I think that even though that may seem trite and it may be a canned response, given from a PR firm, often I think it is, I do think it conveys something about the human experience, that we so often find ourselves doing things and then wanting to distance ourselves from those things that we do, and having some confusion and frustration over this kind of underlying sense of identity. And so, and I think that's where the Enneagram can be so helpful. And in so doing, help us really live lives with more wisdom. Because I also connect this idea of struggling to know who we are with the need for wisdom in our lives. I find it tragically ironic that we are information rich, but wisdom poor. I think having literally the world's worth of information at our thumb tips hasn't necessarily made us any more wise. And I think the need for discernment in order to be able to authentically live with wisdom is perpetual. And it's something that we always need, not just when we're in college, right? Not just for my students here on campus, but for all of us, and certainly me.
Yeah. And I think, would you say that there's been a lot of "that's not who I am" in this last year, where people who are followed around with, they're with a video or a microphone, we have so many opportunities to misspeak or to, respond out of that dominant instinct, that dominant style?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think there are plenty of opportunities for us. I think we've always had opportunities to experience that phenomenon of, wait, that's not who I am, or that's not who I want to be, or that's not who I hope to be. I do think with the stress and the uniqueness of this past year on so many fronts, in terms of political tension, racial reckonings, pandemic, I could go on and on. I think it has created a collective stress that probably causes us to maybe react as opposed to respond more often, and then find ourselves in these situations where we're trying to backpedal and maybe hope for a mulligan where we could maybe do this with some discernment, as opposed to just maybe a knee-jerk reaction that is caught, on camera and perhaps going viral. Hopefully not, right?
Right. Or even just in your living room with people that you really care about, right? Or, in my world, I have, both in my vocation and my avocation, we have people that we can disturb in a heartbeat because we have such divergent thinking in this moment. And so I wonder how you see these discernment questions helping us to regulate our anxiety. You talk about in your book that those that were born in 1997, I think is what you said, have more anxiety than ever before. And so how would those questions help regulate anxiety and help open us to wisdom?
Yeah. Well, and maybe what would be helpful here is, okay if I share my screen? Would that be all right while we talk, Claire?
Please.
Okay. So what I'm going to do, all right, can everyone see this okay here? So, given that the Enneagram is a visual tool, it's probably helpful to see it to some degree. So when I talk about discernment, especially as it relates to how we kind of make wise decisions, whether they be, the thousands of tiny decisions we make every day, or kind of the big milestone decisions that we all make in life, I think it's helpful to think about what it is. And then, because if we know what it is, then we can work on cultivating it. And if we know what it is, and then we have a better understanding of our dominant Enneagram style, then we can really learn how to navigate what I call a way of discernment that can be helpful to us. So here are just some thoughts I have about discernment. I do think it is a gift and a practice. So it's something that we do receive, I think. But I also think it's something that we can cultivate. And I think this is where the Enneagram can become so helpful. It does require self-knowledge. Like we have to have an understanding of who we are and live in some sort of authentic way so that we can make wise decisions. And I also say it's a process as opposed to a destination. I think we're prone, especially certain Enneagram styles are prone to look at decisions as a destination to arrive at, as opposed to a process to live out. It's also very complex. And I also think discernment is holistic, which is where the Enneagram can be really helpful. That it requires all of us, not just our brains, right? But it requires all of our beings. So I boil all that down in the book and then, spend a lot of tens of thousands of words unpacking it, but really it's applied identity is what I'm talking about here. That when we have an authentic sense of who we are and live accordingly, we live with discernment. Now that's easier said than done though, right? So what I do then is I pose these 9 questions, walk kind of readers through the 9 questions, which I'll share here, and then go into each type and how each type needs to navigate those 9 questions. But first, what I do is I look at maybe some of the things that are in our way, some of these hindrances to discernment. And I'm sure many, if not all, on this call here are familiar, with the triads of the Enneagram, and even how the triads and the intelligence centers are often paired with these primary or dominant emotions, which is why, in some Enneagram circles, you'll hear the gut triad, or you'll hear the anger triad. Now, we could do all sorts of things with these primary or dominant emotions, but I do think for this conversation, it's helpful for us to think about how our anger, especially as an 8s, 9s, and 1s, our anger serves as a barrier to discernment. And in the book, I actually gonna go into some of the physiology and the neuroscience of what anger does to us and how it actually inhibits our ability to make good, complex decisions. Or in my triad, my dominant style is a type 3. So I'm very familiar with this. The heart triad, we really struggle with shame. And if you've experienced shame, that kind of inward kind of imploding feeling, that kind of comes over you like a fog and just kind of powers you down. It's a barrier to discernment. And then those head types, the 5s, the 6s, and 7s experience fear. And if fear can also be a barrier to discernment. And so what I encourage people to do is, as these emotions arise, because often these emotions arise when we face really important, stressful, or complicated decisions. We're prone to feel anger, shame, or fear. And instead of them becoming barriers that kind of shortcut or circumvent our decision-making, I encourage us to think about how they can become invitations. So, and I think that works no matter your faith tradition. I think it works if you adopt contemplative spiritual practices, meditation, or if you're into Jungian shadow work. I think these barriers can become invitations with some intentional work. All right. So the 9 questions. Should we go into the 9 questions, Claire?
Oh, yes. These 9 questions.
Okay.
Everybody get your pen ready.
Okay. And then I'll have a summary slide. I'm a big fan of the summary slide. So I'll have that at the end too, if you miss anything. So in this way of discernment, I have 9 questions, and again, see what I did here. I divided them into 3 triads. Now these triads don't automatically correspond with the circle of the Enneagram, but I do think they help kind of group and categorize what I consider to be that these, if we think about discernment as a a journey that we walk, these are some of the territories that we go through. And the first is the vocation triad. And by vocation, I use that term really, I'd say, holistically and globally. I consider vocation to be a sense of calling upon one's life and upon all of one's life. So for instance, I consider my vocation not just to be my job that I have here in my office on campus, but I also consider my vocation as something I'm called to at home, in my community, in my faith tradition, and so on and so forth. So we're going to get into that. And then the wisdom triad, this is where I get into a lot of the intelligence centers of the Enneagram and do some work there and how we might be able to cultivate a holistic sense of wisdom. And then the practice triad, this is where I look, and this is perhaps one of maybe more of the unique contributions I make to the book, or to the conversation, is I look at time and how each type engages time, and in some ways that can maybe be helpful to us. So with that, okay, the first triad, the first three questions on this way of discernment, I think are questions of identity, purpose, and direction. So I think the first question is, who am I? Fundamental, existential, and yet critical question. This question of identity, I think, is so important, and the Enneagram can be so helpful to us because I talk about in the book, if you've ever seen or had a caricature drawing taken of you, and kind of compare personality style to that. That word caricature comes from the Italian language and means it means a loaded portrait, which I think is very fascinating. And if you look at a caricature, you think it simplifies certain aspects of your look, right, and exaggerates others. And in so doing, it's really loaded. And so maybe peeling away some of that and getting to a true sense of who you are is a really important question, and a good question to ask anytime you're facing a decision. Okay, who am I? Reminding yourself of who you are. And second, why am I here? This is this question of purpose. And this can be a tough question at times, but what I also do in the book is talk about how each Enneagram type tends to settle for what they truly want. And they tend to settle for something less than what they truly want. And that's kind of this loop or tape that continues to play for each personality style. And what I hope to do with this question is help each Enneagram type move from just settling in kind of these default settings over and over again to flourishing in a sense of purpose. And then third, the question, where am I going? It's another good question to always ask. As you face a decision, encounter the proverbial fork in the road, and just ask, okay, where am I going? And does this fit in with where I want my life to go, right? And where I intend for my life to head? That is a question of direction. And one of the things that I encourage all types to do is, instead of just looking at that question as trying to peer down the road, actually looking at the question instead of what's ahead to what's beneath. I've heard discernment defined as the ability to see beneath and through. And I think we are not as conditioned to look down and beneath of where we are, so that we can actually plot a good trajectory for our lives in the many decisions that come our way. Yeah. So those are the three that comprise the vocation triad. That kind of sets the foundation for a lot of the type and intelligence work that I'll do in the other questions. Should I move on, Claire, or do you want to ask anything?
I just am hearing, I don't know, it's an old scary movie, What Lies Beneath.
That's good.
Yeah. Instead of what's ahead, what lies beneath. I think, especially as dominant in style 3, that helps me drop down and in, rather than just moving ahead and then finding out what the carnage I left in my wake.
Yeah.
That's
exactly right. Yeah. But that's, and for certain types, it's easier to drop down and in. Other types like ours, style 3, not our forte. So we need some work and some help doing that. Yeah. Okay. So this third triad, and you'll notice some abbreviations that should be familiar to you if you have read Spiritual Rhythms for the Enneagram. And what I do here is I look at the intelligence centers, and especially from the lens of the stances, or sometimes in some circles they're called the social styles or the Hornevian groups of the Enneagram. And think through these three questions and how those intelligence centers help us consider the three questions of what am I doing, which is I would consider to be really a gut center question, not exclusively, but primarily. And then moving into our heart center, what am I feeling? And then moving into our head center, what am I thinking? And of course, as we know that there's corresponding intelligences with each of these intelligence centers. And I talk in the book about how even though this ancient wisdom of the Enneagram has long taught this, that our heads, hearts, and our guts help us take in information and make sense of it, we're actually learning from neuroscience and neurobiology of how that this is actually true, and that these three centers actually do perform some really important functions and work together. And so if we can bring these three centers to bear when we face a complex situation, I argue that we cultivate wisdom. So when we use our bodies, our hearts, and our heads in collaboration and coordination with one another, we cultivate wisdom. So these are three great questions to ask when we are faced with a challenging decision. And this, if you've done any kind of social styles or stance work, then you have probably encountered the work of Hurley and Donson, which I borrow from in the book, who they talk about a dominant, supporting, and repressed intelligence center for each stance, which I have in the illustration here. You see the stances there in their fun little triangles. And which then tells us that each stance struggles with one question more than the other, right? So for the aggressive or assertive stance, those three types are going to struggle with what am I feeling? And so they are more likely to try to make a decision without even considering or consulting their heart center. And I would say that something that we need to do then is cultivate what I call a wise heart, for those three types, because we need that information. I need that information. Or for the dependent, or in some circles known as the compliant types, what am I thinking is an important question for them to really dig into and consider and draw upon the intelligence that they have, as opposed to maybe question it or shirk it, for something else. And then the withdrawn types, the 4s, 5s, and 9s, I think really need to lean into this question of what am I doing? And what do I need to be doing, in order to act and engage my world in order to make this decision? So I think those are three questions that can really help us all, but we need to actually bring all three to bear. And our Enneagram style often wants to focus on one or two more than the others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I would just add as another way of viewing that, and certainly all models are incomplete, but some are helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I think when I look at the dismissed childlike self, and find that it really does have to do with nurture, what is repressed, or what is, what is dismissed, or what is, as Dr. Robert Mulholland would say, what is undernourished. Yeah. And so if there's been a spot that is undernourished based on your family of origin or your primary caregivers dance, we find what we have just kind of relegated to the basement. Like, that's right. This can definitely be in the lead, but that is just not what I'm looking at. So, but those are just great questions to say, I can't come to wisdom unless I'm paying attention to each of these centers of intelligence.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think by having them listed and developing a practice of walking through all three just ensures that if we have to ask ourselves the question, we at least have to be honest if we're going to say, no, I'm not going to answer that question, as opposed to pretending it's not there.
Right.
Yeah. And in the book for each type, I give practices to help, kind of raise up or cultivate these maybe malnourished or undernourished questions. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that maybe even just saying it right now, everybody, you're on mute. Just go ahead and say the question that you're least likely to ask. Because if you can name it, you can tame it. Anyway, that's my Pentecostal background. Okay, let's keep going.
Well, we could talk about that, I'm sure. Okay. All right. So as I mentioned, what I recommend for aggressive types is to really lean into cultivating a wise heart, because they're so good at acting and thinking and acting. Dependent types, cultivating a wise mind. Again, it doesn't mean that they're unintelligent or not smart, but they're often leaving some of their brilliance on the table. And withdrawn types, cultivating wise bodies, learning to listen to the body as opposed to, maybe pretending it's not there, and focusing more on the head and the heart. So a lot more we could say about that, but I do want to get to the practice triad. And what I did here is when I was doing some research and study, I came across in Hurley and Donson these kind of passing lines in some of their work that each stance in the Enneagram tends to have a dominant orientation or preferred orientation to time. But then they didn't say really anything else about it. They may have in maybe some of their teachings or, other things that I couldn't find. And so I started playing around with this and thinking, if the Enneagram itself is inherently logical and triadic, which I believe it is, then I think that there's a triadic experience with time as it relates to each type. And so what I mean by that is that each type has a dominant or preferred orientation towards time, supported by another orientation towards time, often at the expense of a third orientation towards time. So what that would look like for me as a type 3, I won't speak for you, Claire, but for me, is that 3 being in the aggressive stance, I tend to be very future oriented. I have goals that I want to achieve. I have things that I'm working towards. I have my eyes on what's next. Mm-hmm. And I am present enough to get to that next thing on the agenda.
Just present enough.
Yeah, just present enough. But it also fuels a lot of my kind of getting things done mentality. What I struggle the most with is the past, because the past slows down my efficiency. It causes me to, if I slow down to reflect upon the past, then I let my heart catch up to my body. and that can be scary for me as a 3 sometimes. And it also causes me to confront my past mistakes as opposed to just pretend that they're in ancient history, right? And so that's one example. And we can go through, we could go through some other time, each of the 9 styles and see how this kind of dominant, supporting, and repressed stacking kind of plays out. And so what I encourage everyone to do with regards to discernment is ask these 3 questions, which really get at the 3 orientations of time. First, what am I remembering? This is the past. Now, for the withdrawn types who are past oriented, past preferred, this is an easier question for them to engage for the withdrawn types, not, as I said, for the aggressive types. And then secondly, what am I experiencing in the present? This is an important question. This is the one that the withdrawn types tend to struggle with the most because they often want to vacillate between the past and the future. And then third, what am I anticipating in the future? This is the one that I would argue the dependent types struggle with the most because they're so kind of focused on the tyranny of the urgent. Those to get done what's right in front of them, they don't have the time or luxury to maybe cast their gaze up and look ahead to a good and vibrant future. So I think those 3 questions can help mitigate against some of our unwillingness to live into what I call the fullness of time, which I think helps us discern our lives better. So if I would argue that if I'm facing a decision that's really important, if I reflect upon the past, if I reflect and consider my experience in the future, and if I'm honest about what I'm anticipating, in the present, and if I'm honest with what I'm anticipating in the future, I will make a better decision. Mm-hmm. And I would guess that you would too. And so I think that's important. So what I do then is in these stances, I encourage cultivating for aggressive types what I call a sacred delay. an intentional pause to kind of look back before moving on to the next thing. And that can even, dare I say, include celebrating, which is not something that these types also do. It's not just about owning up to all your failures, but also truly honoring and savoring good work that's been done.
Well, and let me just pause right there.
Yeah.
So maybe you've never seen the word sacred and delay right together.
Right.
So it's a little bit of a
Perhaps not.
jumbo shrimp kind of.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think the past is a powerful teacher, right? We learn from the past. We should anyway. And then dependent types cultivate sacred vision, like intentionally practice what it looks like to cast a vision for your future. It will feel luxurious and indulgent or impossible to some in the dependent stance, but I think it's really important. And then withdrawn type, sacred presence. What does it mean to be fully here now without maybe worrying about what was or dreaming about what could be? What does it mean to be fully present in the here and now with your full self? I think it's an important thing to consider. So again, tons more to say about that. I want to be mindful of time and make sure we have time for questions. And
yeah, so we do want to open it up for question and response. And if you'd like to put something in the chat there or raise your hand so we know, we'll unmute you as we see that. And let's see here. Yeah, you have another 3 saying what lies beneath. She's liking that as well. Danielle is saying, what am I feeling? Do you want to unmute yourself and say what you're thinking about there, Danielle? Or not. We can always say pass.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah. So do you want to ask a question around what you wrote in the chat, Danielle?
You hear me, Claire?
I can hear you now.
Okay, good. I've been trying to work this unmute button on my phone. Okay, so I'm dominant in type 1 with a super muscular 9 wing. My 9 wing looks like Popeye's arm.
all right.
And so in that 9 wing, I find myself delaying, not sacredly delaying, but the other kind of delaying my feelings in favor of what other people are experiencing and what their experience confirms about my goodness or my badness, right?
Yeah.
And so I really like really digging in, and so I'm even in a space right now where a relative has violated my COVID-19 boundaries, and of course, that relative, knowing how I feel about these things, knowing I'm a rule follower, is, really providing a lot of backlash because I've addressed the boundary that has been crossed, right?
Sure.
And so I have just decided to be still and just cultivate my inner observer and really sense into what's happening for me as it is my boundary that's been crossed. You know what I'm saying? And so just wanted to get any wisdom from you about how you would encourage a 1 with a 9 wing to tune in and tap into their feelings and their journey of healing when they've been triggered, particularly regarding pandemic safety, right?
Wow, that's complicated, but a really good question. I do think my understanding of 1 with a strong 9 wing, and please feel free to correct me or push back, is that there is a lot of inner conflict and inner turmoil, because from that kind of 1 space, there is such a sense of rightness and goodness and a standard to be measured against that often comes in conflict with that 9 wing, which is really about calm and keeping peace and maintaining perspective. And that can be a difficult place to kind of reside in, especially in stressful situations when someone crosses your boundaries, which you know are wrong, and then how to respond to that. And so I think it makes sense that with a strong 9-wing, stillness is a posture. That does make sense to me. But yeah, and I think here, if we looked at these questions, I think they could be helpful. So, what am I thinking? As opposed to just remaining still, what am I thinking could be a helpful question for you as a 1 to consider, like, what am I truly thinking through as I navigate the stress of this environment and this dynamic? And then also, what am I anticipating in the future, right? As opposed to just fixating on what was wrong right now, what is wrong right now, what's a hopeful vision look like, so I can begin to work towards that with or without this relative's permission, but that I can start that journey. That's tough though. Yeah.
That is helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, and I love that because it leads into this next question, which I think I can put 2 together.
Okay, great.
Roger asks, what is the role of community? And then Michael Fox says, biblically, wisdom is relational, and your work seems to honor that, either by gravitation or navigation. So do you want to speak to what our folks are?
Yeah, I'd love to. Those are important points that I get to in the book, but due to time, didn't get into quite a bit. But I do talk in the book about the important role of the community, right? Because sometimes we can get so caught up in our kind of own identity crises and existential angst that we really do need a vibrant community around us to help us discern. So discernment, it's a gift and a practice. It's also an individual process and a communal process. I think that there are discernment things that we can do on our own, and discernment things that we can do with others, right? So for instance, the Quakers have this tradition of a clearness committee. Like when they're facing a difficult kind of crossroads, they go to this clearness committee who is appointed to just ask good questions of them, right? And then the answer tends to emerge, right? So it's not where you submit a proposal and they say approve or not approve. They just ask good open-ended questions which help you process through the decision in community. And so I think it's so critical. And wisdom is relational as well. It doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? And because human beings are relational, right? And that's part of what's been so challenging about this season of isolation and quarantine, is that I worry that it's truncating and limiting some of those aspects of our wisdom formation. And so we have to really fight for them and be very intentional about the relationships that we have. And so what I often tell people is, who are your people who know your hopes and fears and will care for them well? Like those are the people that you should be asking to help you through decisions, right? And I think we all need to have kind of that running list, at least in our heads, of who those people are.
Yeah, beautiful. And those people who will look at you and say, I know who you are.
Yeah.
Right. And
right.
That was one of my dad's great lines when we would leave the house. He'd say, remember who you are.
Wow.
And so there's this calling home to the true self. I'd like to add someone who knows that's not you. Do you have a friend that says, hey, I know, so let me call you back?
Right.
Yeah. Really good. I have Kathleen Acker saying, and I would love for you to name it yourself, Kathleen, because I don't think I'll be able to read this beautiful 6 wondering well.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, it's just interesting to me, and I've noticed this before, that someone dominant in the thinking space, that my thinking, and I think it's because it tends to be dominated by anxiety, aka fear, isn't so wise.
Right.
So it's just interesting to me that one would, I could assume, I'm in my head. Let me tell you, I'm really good at thinking.
Right,
I can
right.
analyze anything, but that doesn't mean I have wisdom. So there's
Exactly.
just an invitation. There's an invitation for me in this.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think you're right, Kathleen. And the same is true for the 3s in the room and the 9s in the room,
Right.
and who are firmly in the middle of the triad, in which they are in which their intelligence center is dominant for them, but also repressed. So, and what that means is that we are using that intelligence center all the time, but we're misusing it most of the time. Often.
Yes. Yeah.
For 6s, it's probably thinking all the time, but not always the most productive or wise thinking. For 9s, it's doing stuff all the time, always kind of being a busybody, but maybe not doing the thing that really needs to be done. Or for 3s, it's often reading a room and understanding the feelings that are present in the room. And then instead of using it to cultivate empathy, maybe using it as strategy or intel, right? And so we have these kind of settings that we have to really disrupt and so that we can integrate that intelligence center more authentically with wisdom, which is hard work for the 3s, the 6s, and 9s in that kind of unique way. Yeah.
And I think that's where spiritual practices, I think personally, come in for me in terms of the quieting the mind.
Yeah.
And I think, so yeah, the silence,
Yeah.
stillness, all that. I just think that's just really, really helpful.
Yeah. And I think this is especially true of 6s. What I talk about in the book is that I would argue it's the type that probably has the greatest intuition, but trusts it the least.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And which is why, 6s are always preparing for the system to go down, and it rarely ever does. But when the system does go down, they're the ones who kind of rise up and are ready, right? It's because they've prepared for this, they're ready. And they just have that intuition that they just don't trust often. They don't trust themselves enough. And that's kind of the wisdom work often for a 6, is to trust their own intuition and insight.
Yeah. Thank you.
So good. I wonder too, even in these days where all of us, we've said it, your Enneagram style is showing. And in days where none of us know what's ahead in terms of what this world will look like, and how we are engaging in community, as you say, that's truncated. And so we've got the overthinking, the overfeeling, and the overdoing.
Yeah.
So I wonder if there's a practice that you could give all of us that is kind of, a portable practice, something in your back pocket. I love what Carol's saying about how she's noticing the gifts that come from Paul. And so you're bringing together some happy neurons on this call today. People they're enlivened to be looking at some things, but I wonder if you could give us one way that you have seen can help us to connect all 3 centers among all 9 styles in a way that has harmony, and in a way that could offer us a hopeful future. So that's all we need. We need that in 2 minutes. So,
okay. All right. So, because that's a great question. Because in the book, I give a lot of type specific exercises to help with the practice triad questions and the wisdom triad questions. And, to think of something that is more comprehensive, it reminds me of the quote from Viktor Frankl, between, stimulus and response is a space. And in that space, I think is where I think wisdom and growth and development lies. And so I think anytime, any type in any situation can make room to fully engage a decision, it's to their benefit. Because what often so happens is we are so used to the mask that we wear, our Enneagram style kind of driving the bus, that we often don't even think about the way we go about our decisions and how we make them. But actually with some intention and attention, if we actually create space to evaluate and consider our decisions, then I think we'll start to see some of the gaps or some of the maybe unhealthy patterns that are maybe more kind of maladaptive or disruptive. And I really like the definition of hospitality as making room. And I think being hospitable to oneself means that we make room. And maybe a simple practice would be to be hospitable with one's calendar app and make room. Another one of my favorite quotes is from Annie Dillard: how we spend our days is, of course, how we spend our lives. And so if we spend our days just kind of moving from calendar appointment to calendar appointment to calendar appointment and don't make room for ourselves to actually breathe and consider the way we're living our lives, then that's the life we live, for the rest of our life. And so making room by creating space and margin to actually think and evaluate is really critical and helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. Margin. How about that? And who would have thought that we still don't have margin when we're all in captivity?
Well, yeah, because there's endless things that can fill our time, right? Whether that's binge watching Netflix, whether, it's all sorts of things. Or for a lot of people, work, if thankful to have jobs, but it looks completely different and it's more stressful and more time consuming to do that job if it's from home, and so there's all sorts of ways in which I think we need to look back at, and especially now, our calendars, and see, are we creating margin to live our lives so that our calendars aren't living them for us? Because I think the other maybe temptation we could have fallen victim to is think that this is just a temporary weird blip in our lives, this COVID situation, but we're approaching a year. That's a long time to develop habits and patterns that maybe we need to think and evaluate. Yeah.
There's a word. So even as we take a breath here, friends, I know there are some other questions about slides, and just know that this is recorded. So you'll be able to go back and look at those slides on the recording. But let's just take a breath in our closing moment and be hospitable to ourselves. And welcome all that's been happening in our minds, the happy neurons that have been firing here, causing us to wonder and imagine and systematize. And then bring attention to this beautiful heart that we've been given, even maybe the center of your chest, and take a breath and be hospitable to what your heart wants to feel. Well, we haven't had the time to feel. And just bring your attention to the center of your chest, as the heart math people teach us, that there are more neurons going up to our brain, giving us information. If we would pay attention, we can be hospitable. So maybe there was some sadness around knowing that you haven't been paying attention to what you're feeling. Or maybe some hope that says, I actually can ask that question and be hospitable. Just making a little bit of room here to notice. And then just allow yourself, maybe in this last moment, to do just a quick scan to see how you're doing in your body. Psalmists tell us that even our bones know. David said, when I kept silent about these things, even my bones felt like they were wasting away, or my heart came alive. Just notice your body as a place for wisdom, and be hospitable here. Welcoming if there was a tightness in your gut, or the hair on the back of your neck was raised. And just be hospitable right here. Head, heart, and gut. Hospitable with your thinking and your feeling and your doing. And just wonder how you can make more space to be hospitable with yourself. And maybe we can just give thanks here for this small space that can lead to larger space if we allow it. And if we bring attention to what came alive for us today, and then intention on our calendar app. And so we want to thank you, Drew, so much. We'll have here all the ways we can follow you.
Yeah.
You guys can see that, podcasts and the book, and any closing words that you'd like to say?
Oh, it's been an honor to be with you, and thanks for your engagement and interest, and keep in touch. I mean that. So would love to stay connected with any who are interested to learn more, or have questions, or want to stay connected.
Yeah. And Drew, if you have space, any place that touches a lake, you're welcome to hang out with us anytime. And we want to just remind everyone that this will be recorded. It has been recorded, so you'll be able to see it on the Great Lakes Facebook page. You'll be able to see it on YouTube, and it will also be featured on Enneagram and Christianity podcast. So you guys, this has been rich, and lots of compliments there from people saying the simplicity and the brilliance of the way you put it together. Just really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, it's been an honor and a lovely group. So I'll be back for sure.
All right.
Thank you.